The first sign that my life was about to change came in the form of a single sheet of paper. It was waiting on my pillow. I found it late on a Tuesday night after returning from dinner with an old colleague. The bedroom was dark except for the lamp beside my bed, and at first I thought someone had left a shopping list there. Then I saw my name, Mom. I picked up the note and read it. I've been meaning to tell you this for a long time. Stop planning your future around me in this house. I have my own responsibilities, my own family, and my own children to worry about. You need to make your own plans. I read every line, then I read it again. But I didn't cry, I didn't gasp, and I certainly didn't march across the property to demand an explanation. Instead, I folded the paper along its original crease, placed it neatly on my nightstand, changed into my pajamas, and went to sleep. And for the first time in months, I slept wonderfully. My name is Eleanor Whitcomb. I am 68 years old, widowed for 9 years, and recently retired after spending more than 3 decades as a school administrator. Managing teenagers taught me many things. The most important lesson was this: when someone tries to provoke you, you do not always have to give them the reaction they expect. Sometimes silence is more powerful. At exactly 7 o'clock the next morning, I called my attorney. By noon, my estate documents had been completely revised. My son, Nathaniel Whitcomb, was no longer my executor. At 1:30 that afternoon, Nathaniel came charging through the front door of my cottage without even knocking. Mom, his face was flushed, his breathing was heavy. I was standing at the kitchen counter, rinsing a coffee mug. "What happened?" I asked calmly. "What happened?" he repeated. "My lawyer just called me. Her office got some kind of notification that I'm no longer the executor of your estate." I dried my hands slowly. Then I walked into my bedroom, picked up the folded letter, and returned to the kitchen. I held it out to him. Nathaniel stared at his own handwriting. His expression changed. "Mom, I did exactly what you asked," I said. His eyes lifted toward mine. "What does that even mean?" "You told me not to plan my future around you." His mouth opened. I continued before he could interrupt. "You said you had your own family and responsibilities, so I decided to take you seriously. That was just a note." "Yes," I replied, "and this was just a will." For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Nathaniel rubbed both hands over his face. "You're taking this way too far." I smiled. "No, sweetheart. I think I spent 6 years not taking things far enough." That was the truth. To understand why one note could change everything, you need to understand what had happened 6 years earlier. Back then, Nathaniel and his wife Kendra were struggling financially. They were expecting their first child and living in a cramped apartment with rising rent and barely enough space for a crib. I owned a beautiful property on the edge of town. The main house had 4 bedrooms, a large backyard, and a wraparound porch. Behind it stood a smaller detached cottage that had once belonged to my late husband's parents. After Nathaniel told me how worried they were about money, I made what I believed was a generous offer. I used a large portion of my savings to renovate the cottage for myself. Then I gave Nathaniel and Kendra the entire main house, rent-free. The agreement was simple. They would handle their own utilities and household expenses. I would live quietly in the cottage while they raised their family and saved money for their future. At first, they were grateful. Nathaniel hugged me. Kendra cried. They promised they would never forget what I had done. But gratitude can disappear surprisingly fast when generosity becomes routine. Year after year, their temporary arrangement became their permanent expectation. Kendra began redecorating rooms without asking me. Some of my furniture disappeared. A few pieces had belonged to my mother. When I asked where they had gone, she casually told me they had been too outdated for the house. Then came the babysitting. Sometimes I would open my front door and find my grandson standing on the porch with a backpack while Kendra's car disappeared down the driveway. No request, no phone call, just an assumption. Nathaniel rarely objected. That was perhaps the saddest part. My confident, independent son had slowly become someone who avoided conflict at any cost. I tolerated more than I should have because I loved my grandson. But during the months before Nathaniel left that note on my pillow, Kendra had become increasingly bold. One afternoon, she stood in the yard with two friends and glanced toward my cottage. "You know," she said loudly, "that little place would make an amazing gym someday." Her friends laughed. "When Eleanor finally decides to downsize," Kendra added. Nathaniel stood beside her. He said nothing, and suddenly I understood something. They didn't see me as the owner of the property anymore. They saw me as the inconvenient woman living in the way of the life they believed they deserved. Then Nathaniel left that letter on my pillow, and he gave me exactly what I needed. Clarity. The following morning, I sat at my kitchen table with black coffee, my laptop, and a decision. If Nathaniel truly wanted me to stop building my life around him, then I would start immediately. For years, I had quietly paid several expenses connected to the property. When Nathaniel and Kendra first moved into the main house, I had arranged automatic payments for the water, internet, and waste collection. It was supposed to be temporary. I wanted their transition into parenthood to be easier. 6 years later, temporary had become permanent. I was also paying for a family mobile phone plan that included both Nathaniel and Kendra. Then, there was the SUV. 3 years earlier, Nathaniel's old vehicle had finally broken down. I purchased a reliable SUV so he could commute to work and transport his family safely. The title, however, remained in my name. At the time, Nathaniel had thanked me endlessly. Now, apparently, I was supposed to stop planning my future around him. So, I began clicking. First, I canceled the automatic payments connected to the main house and transferred responsibility for future bills to Nathaniel's household. Then, I logged into the mobile account and removed both Nathaniel and Kendra from my plan. Their service would end at midnight. Finally, I contacted my insurance company regarding the SUV. Within less than half an hour, I had eliminated hundreds of dollars in monthly expenses. When I closed my laptop, I expected to feel guilty. Instead, I felt lighter. For years, I had confused helping my family with permanently carrying them. There was a difference. I spent the rest of the afternoon outside, trimming my rose bushes and enjoying the warm breeze. I didn't call Nathaniel. I didn't send Kendra a warning. There was nothing to discuss. Adults receive bills every day. They survive. Friday morning brought exactly the reaction I expected. I was sitting on my porch with a mystery novel when Nathaniel came marching across the lawn. His phone was in his hand. "Mom." I placed my bookmark between the pages. "Good morning, Nathaniel. My phone doesn't work." "I'm sorry to hear that. And the Wi-Fi is down in the house." "My Wi-Fi is working perfectly." He stared at me. "What?" I took another sip of coffee. "Your phone and internet services are no longer attached to my accounts." His eyebrows pulled together. "You canceled them?" "I removed you from my plans." "You can't just do that." I smiled faintly. "Of course I can. You have your own responsibilities now." His face changed immediately. "Seriously? You're still doing this because of that stupid letter?" Before I could answer, the main house door slammed open. Kendra appeared wearing a silk robe and looking furious. "Eleanor!" she shouted. "What did you do to the internet?" "I stopped paying for it." Her mouth fell open. "You cut us off without telling us. You've lived here for 6 years without paying rent. I assumed you had enough time to prepare for ordinary household expenses. We have a child, and you have 2 working adults in that house." Kendra folded her arms. Her expression hardened. "You are being unbelievably petty." No, I said. I'm becoming organized. She looked at Nathaniel, clearly expecting him to defend her. He said nothing. Then she turned back toward me. If you're going to behave like this, maybe you shouldn't expect to see your grandson this weekend. There it was, the threat. For years, Kendra had discovered that mentioning my grandson was the fastest way to make me surrender. If she needed childcare, I helped. If she wanted me to buy something, I considered it. If she disliked one of my decisions, she reminded me how easily family relationships could become complicated. But something had changed. I picked up my book. That is your decision as his mother. Kendra stared at me. She had expected tears. Instead, she received a turned page. For several seconds, neither of them moved. Then Nathaniel muttered something under his breath, and the two of them returned to the main house. The following morning, I made another change. Kendra had developed a terrible habit over the years. She treated my cottage as though it belonged to everyone. Sometimes, she entered without knocking to borrow food. Other times, she took laundry supplies, kitchen items, or whatever else she needed. Once, I returned from an appointment and found her sitting in my living room searching through a cabinet. When I asked what she was doing, she laughed and said she was looking for batteries. I had ignored too much. Saturday morning, I drove to the hardware store. I purchased new locks for both my front and back doors. My late husband had taught me enough about home repairs to handle basic projects, and replacing a deadbolt was well within my abilities. By lunchtime, the old locks were gone. At around 2 o'clock, I heard footsteps approaching my porch. The handle turned. Then, it turned again. "Eleanor?" Kendra called. I remained seated on the sofa. A few seconds later, she knocked. "Eleanor, open the door." I stood and walked toward the entrance, but I didn't unlock it. "What is it?" "I need to leave my son with you for an hour. I have an appointment." "I'm unavailable today." Silence. Then, her voice sharpened. "You're inside. Just open the door." "No, you can't be serious," I smiled to myself. "My home is not a drop-off center, Kendra." Her heels struck the porch as she turned away. A moment later, I heard her stomping across the grass toward the main house. I looked at the new lock. It was only a small piece of metal, but to me, it represented something much larger. For the first time in years, the boundaries on my property were finally becoming real, and I had a feeling Nathaniel and Kendra were about to discover that losing free Wi-Fi was only the beginning. For the next several days, an uneasy silence settled over the property. Nathaniel and Kendra eventually arranged their own phone service and internet. Delivery trucks still arrived at the main house, but not nearly as often as before. I suspected that for the first time in years, they were beginning to understand how expensive ordinary life could be. I did not celebrate their discomfort. I simply continued living mine. Then came Saturday evening. I was sitting in my cottage working on a crossword puzzle when I heard music drifting across the lawn. At first, I ignored it. Kendra loved entertaining, and I had long since accepted that the main house would occasionally be noisy. But when the laughter grew louder, I walked to the kitchen window. That was when I saw them. Nathaniel and Kendra were carrying my wrought iron patio chairs across the lawn. My table followed. Then I noticed something else. My 6-burner grill was blazing. I stared through the window. Not one message, not one request. They had simply decided that because the items were sitting on my side of the property, they were available for use. A familiar anger began rising inside me, but this time I didn't rush outside. I watched. Several guests had gathered around the patio. Kendra was holding a glass of wine while Nathaniel stood near the grill. Then I heard her voice. "We love having all this space," she said, gesturing toward the yard. One of her guests asked something I couldn't hear. Kendra laughed. "That little cottage in the back won't stay Eleanor's forever. She's getting older. Eventually, she'll have to move somewhere smaller." A few people chuckled politely. Kendra continued, "My parents could use it when they visit, or we could turn it into a gym. Honestly, we just need to convince her that she doesn't need all that space anymore." This time, the laughter sounded uncomfortable. I stood very still. It wasn't the idea of a gym that bothered me. It was the assumption. They were discussing my future as though I had already disappeared. They were making plans for my home while I sat 20 yards away, and apparently they believed I was powerless to stop them. I put on my shoes, then I walked outside. The conversation slowly faded as people noticed me approaching. Nathaniel saw me first. His shoulders tightened immediately. "Mom, good evening," I said pleasantly. I smiled at the guests. "Please don't let me interrupt." Kendra's expression changed, but only slightly. She still seemed convinced that I had come outside to complain. Instead, I walked directly toward the patio table. Nathaniel's car keys were lying beside a tray of appetizers. I picked them up. "Mom, what are you doing?" he asked. "Collecting my property." His face went pale. Several guests exchanged confused looks. I slipped the keys into my pocket, then I turned toward the grill. "Be careful with the left burners," I said. "They get hotter than you think." And with that, I walked back to my cottage. I never raised my voice. I never mentioned what I had overheard. I didn't need to. The message was clear. The furniture was mine. The grill was mine. The SUV was mine. And most importantly, the land beneath every one of their feet was mine. Sunday morning arrived quietly. By 8:30, I was enjoying my second cup of coffee when someone knocked sharply on my door. I already knew who it was. I unlocked the door and found Nathaniel standing on the porch. He was dressed for golf and looked furious. "Where are the keys? Good morning to you too." "Mom, I'm serious. So am I. My friends have been waiting for me." I leaned against the door frame. "Then you should probably tell them you're not coming." He stared at me. "I need that SUV for work tomorrow." "No, Nathaniel. You need transportation for work tomorrow. That SUV belongs to me. You've let me drive it for years. And now I've changed my mind." His expression hardened. "You're punishing me." "No," I shook my head. "I am protecting myself." I explained that the vehicle was no longer insured under my policy. His face lost its color. "You canceled the insurance?" "Yes." "Are you crazy? What am I supposed to do?" I almost laughed. It was astonishing how quickly a grown man could become helpless when someone stopped solving every problem for him. "You can buy a car, lease one, use public transportation, ask a friend for a ride. You're capable of figuring it out. But why are you doing this?" I looked directly at him. "Because you told me to stop planning my life around you." For the first time, Nathaniel had no answer. His shoulders dropped. "That note wasn't supposed to mean all this." "Then perhaps you should have thought about what it meant before you left it on my pillow." He stared at the floor. I felt a small ache in my chest. He was still my son. I still remembered the little boy who used to fall asleep on my shoulder during thunderstorms. But loving someone does not mean allowing them to disrespect you. "I've decided to sell the SUV," I continued. His head snapped up. "What?" "Someone is coming later today to inspect it." "You can't do that." "Yes," I said softly. "I can." Nathaniel stepped closer. "Kendra is furious about last night. She said you humiliated us. I collected my own keys. You embarrassed us in front of everyone. And Kendra discussed removing me from my own home in front of everyone." His eyes widened. For a moment, he looked genuinely uncomfortable. So, he had heard her. Or perhaps he had known exactly what she had been saying all along. "I think you should go," I told him. "Mom, go." He stood there for another moment before turning away. I closed the door. The new deadbolt clicked into place, and as I listened to his footsteps fade across the lawn, I realized something important. Taking back the phone plan, the utilities, and the SUV had felt good. But every morning, I still looked out my window and saw the main house. I saw Kendra watching me from inside. I felt the resentment growing across the property. This wasn't peace. It was a temporary truce. And suddenly, I knew exactly what I wanted. A complete fresh start. That afternoon, I reached for my phone and called an old friend. Her name was Patricia Vance, and she had been selling real estate for almost 30 years. Patricia arrived less than an hour after I called her. She was one of those people who could walk into a difficult situation, understand everything in 5 minutes, and never make you feel foolish for waiting too long to act. After greeting me, she looked around the cottage and smiled. "So," she said, "what exactly are you thinking?" "I want out." Her smile faded slightly. "Out of what?" I looked through the kitchen window toward the main house. This entire arrangement. Patricia followed my gaze. She knew Nathaniel and Kendra had been living on the property, although I had never shared every detail of our family problems. "You're serious?" "Completely." We spent the next hour walking around the property. The main house was still beautiful despite Kendra's decorating choices. The yard was large, the neighborhood was desirable, and the separate cottage gave the property an unusual advantage. When we finished, Patricia stopped near the driveway. "Eleanor, you know what you have here? A headache," she laughed. "A valuable property." She explained that the combination of the main house and renovated cottage would attract buyers looking for multi-generational living, a private office, or a separate space for guests. "How quickly could it sell?" I asked. "In this market, if we price it correctly, very quickly. Then list it." Patricia studied my face. "What about Nathaniel and Kendra?" "My name is the only one on the deed. Do they have a lease?" "No." She nodded slowly. "Then before we do anything, make sure you follow the proper legal process for ending their occupancy." Of course. I had already spent enough years making decisions based on emotion. I wasn't going to make another major decision carelessly. After speaking with my attorney and confirming the appropriate steps, I gave Nathaniel and Kendra formal written notice according to the rules that applied to their arrangement. Then I signed the listing agreement. For the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't expected: excitement. That evening, I opened several boxes and began sorting through old photographs, books, and belongings. I found a picture of my late husband, Franklin, standing beside me on the day we bought the property. We had been younger then. The house had been full of possibilities. I sat on the floor holding the photograph for several minutes. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I should have protected our home better." But almost immediately, another thought followed. No, I wasn't destroying the life we had built. I was simply allowing my life to continue. Tuesday morning arrived bright and clear. At 9:30, a truck pulled into the driveway. A man stepped out carrying a large wooden post and a sign. I was sitting on my porch with a cup of tea when Kendra finally noticed him. The front door of the main house flew open. "What is that?" she shouted. The man continued working. Within minutes, a large sign stood firmly in the front yard. "For sale." Kendra stared at it, then she turned toward me. "What is going on?" I set down my cup. "Good morning, Kendra. You're selling the house?" "Yes." Nathaniel appeared behind her. He looked from the sign to me. "Mom, I warned you. You can't do this." I stood. "Actually, I can." Kendra rushed across the lawn. "This is our home." "No," I said calmly. "It's where you've been living." Her face turned red. "You're throwing us out?" "I am selling my property." "You're unbelievable." I almost smiled. That word again, unbelievable. Apparently, the only believable version of me was the woman who paid their bills, babysat without being asked, and quietly listened while they planned to take over my cottage. Nathaniel stepped forward. "Where are we supposed to go?" I looked directly at him. That is something you should start figuring out immediately. He stared at me. You can't expect us to find a place overnight. I don't. I handed him the written notice. You have the time provided under the proper notice requirements. I strongly suggest that you use it wisely. Kendra grabbed the paper from his hand. You planned this? Yes. Her eyes narrowed. You've been planning this since you found that letter. No. I shook my head. I started planning this when I finally understood the letter. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Then Kendra lowered her voice. What if we refuse to leave? Then I will continue following the legal process. She looked toward the main house. For the first time, fear crossed her face. Not anger, not arrogance. Fear. The reality had finally arrived. The property was never theirs. The SUV was never Nathaniel's. The cottage was never Kendra's future gym. Everything they had treated as permanent had belonged to someone else, and that someone had finally decided to move on. The next few weeks were filled with inspections, paperwork, and showings. I kept my distance. I didn't argue with them. I didn't celebrate when Kendra complained about apartment prices. I didn't offer to pay a security deposit when Nathaniel admitted they hadn't saved as much money as they should have. I simply continued preparing for my own future. Then, 8 days after the property officially went on the market, Patricia called me. Eleanor, she said, excitement clear in her voice. We have an excellent offer. I stood on my porch and looked toward the house. For 6 years, I had believed that property represented security for my family. Now, I understood something different. A home cannot give you peace when the people inside it treat your kindness like a weakness. I accepted the offer, and from that moment on, Nathaniel and Kendra's countdown truly began. The offer closed faster than I expected. Patricia had warned me that the property would attract serious buyers, especially because of the separate cottage. Still, hearing that someone was willing to purchase the entire place less than 2 weeks after it went on the market felt almost unreal. The moment the paperwork was signed, something changed. The main house was no longer the center of a family dispute. It was simply a property with a closing date, and Nathaniel and Kendra had limited time to leave it behind. At first, they reacted exactly as I expected. Kendra became angry. Nathaniel became anxious. Neither reaction surprised me. One afternoon, I stepped outside to collect the mail and found Nathaniel sitting alone on the porch of the main house. He looked exhausted. For a moment, I saw not the grown man who had left that note on my pillow, but the little boy who used to wait for me after school. I almost walked over and hugged him. Almost. Instead, I continued toward my mailbox. Mom, he called. I stopped. What is it? We found an apartment. That's good. He laughed bitterly. You don't even want to know where. Not unless you want to tell me. He stood and walked toward me. It's small. Then you'll learn how much space you actually need. His expression tightened. You really don't care anymore, do you? That question hurt more than I wanted to admit. I turned toward him. Nathaniel, caring about you and rescuing you are not the same thing. He looked away. For a moment, the anger disappeared. I didn't think you'd actually do all of this. I know. Kendra says you're trying to punish us. No, I spoke quietly. If I wanted revenge, I would have spent every day screaming at you. I would have embarrassed you, insulted you, and tried to make you miserable. Then what is this? This is me finally taking responsibility for my own life. He said nothing. I continued. For 6 years, I convinced myself that helping you meant giving you whatever you needed. But somewhere along the way, you stopped seeing my help as a gift. His eyes lowered. It became an expectation. Yes. The silence between us lasted several seconds. Then Nathaniel nodded slowly. I should have said something when Kendra talked about the cottage. Yes, you should have. I should have stopped her from walking into your house. Yes. I should have helped with the bills. Yes. He gave a short, humorless laugh. You're really not going to make this easier for me, are you? I already did. That time, Nathaniel actually smiled, only slightly. But it was the first genuine expression I had seen from him in weeks. Then, Kendra called his name from inside the house. The moment ended. Nathaniel turned back toward the main house. I watched him go. Over the next few days, moving boxes began appearing everywhere. Kendra complained loudly while packing. I heard doors slam once. I saw her throw several bags into the garage with enough force to make me wonder what was inside them, but I stayed out of it. Their new apartment was across town. It had 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and a much smaller living area than the main house. It wasn't luxurious, but it was theirs to pay for. That was the difference. On the 29th day, a moving truck arrived. I watched from my cottage window as Nathaniel carried boxes toward the truck. Kendra followed behind him. Neither of them looked happy, but for the first time in years, they were handling their own responsibilities without waiting for me to solve them. Around noon, Nathaniel walked across the lawn. He knocked on my door. This time, I opened it. I just wanted to say goodbye to the place, he said. You can. He stood beside me on the porch and looked across the property. Do you remember when Dad built that swing? I followed his eyes. The old oak tree still stood near the edge of the yard. I remember. I fell off it. You cried for 2 hours. I was 6. You also demanded that your father remove the tree. Nathaniel laughed, a real laugh. For a few minutes, we stood there remembering the past, and strangely, I felt peaceful. I wasn't losing my son. I was simply refusing to lose myself for him. Before returning to the moving truck, Nathaniel looked at me. I'm sorry about the note. I studied his face. He meant it. I believe you. Are you ever going to forgive me? I already have. His eyes widened slightly. But forgiveness doesn't mean everything goes back to the way it was. He nodded. I understand. And perhaps for the first time, he truly did. By sunset, the truck was full. Kendra climbed into the passenger seat without looking toward my cottage. Nathaniel stood beside the truck for a final moment. Then he gave me a small wave. I returned it. The truck pulled away. I waited until the sound of the engine disappeared. Then I stepped outside. The property was quiet, completely quiet. I looked toward the empty main house. For 6 years, I had believed that silence meant loneliness. Now I understood that silence could also mean freedom. The sale would close soon, and I had already found a place I wanted to see, a modern condominium beside a peaceful lake. It had large windows, a private balcony, and absolutely no guest cottage for anyone to claim. For the first time in a very long time, I wasn't thinking about what Nathaniel needed. I wasn't thinking about what Kendra wanted. I was thinking about what Eleanor Whitcomb wanted, and that felt better than I could have imagined. 3 weeks after Nathaniel and Kendra moved out, the sale of the property was complete. I stood in the empty main house one final time before handing over the keys. The rooms looked smaller without furniture. Strangely, they also looked peaceful. For years, this house had represented family to me. It was where Nathaniel had grown up. It was where my husband and I had celebrated birthdays, holidays, graduations, and countless ordinary Sundays that once seemed unimportant. But a house can hold memories without holding your future. I ran my hand along the kitchen counter and smiled. Thank you, I whispered. Then I walked outside. The buyers were waiting. They were a young couple with plans of their own. They loved the property because the main house gave them space for their children, while the cottage would become a private studio for one of them. I wished them well, and then I left. I didn't look back. The money from the sale gave me more than enough to begin again comfortably. After meeting with my financial advisor and making careful decisions about my savings, I purchased a modern condominium overlooking a quiet lake. The first morning I woke up there, I opened the curtains and stood by the glass doors. The water was perfectly still. Sunlight reflected across the surface. There was no large house outside my window. No one was watching me from another kitchen. No footsteps approaching my door without permission. No one expected me to babysit. No one expected me to pay a bill. For the first time in years, every inch of my home belonged to my peace. I bought a comfortable chair for the balcony. I filled the shelves with books. I planted herbs in small pots near the window. And I learned something that surprised me. Starting over at 68 didn't feel frightening. It felt liberating. Of course, Nathaniel's absence was not permanent. About a month after I moved, he called. "Can I come over?" "Yes." "Are you sure?" I smiled. "You're my son, Nathaniel. You don't need permission to be loved. You just need permission to enter the building." He laughed. That weekend, he came alone. He looked different, not dramatically older, but more serious, more aware of the world around him. He brought pastries from a bakery near his apartment and placed them on my kitchen counter. "You didn't have to bring anything," I said. "I know." We sat together near the window. For the first half hour, we talked about ordinary things. His job, my new neighbors, my grandson's latest obsession with dinosaurs. Eventually, however, Nathaniel grew quiet. "Mom?" "Yes." "I've been thinking about everything." I waited. "I was angry when you changed your will." "I know. I thought you were trying to hurt me." I said nothing. "But now I understand why you did it." I looked toward the lake. "Do you?" He nodded. "I had started believing everything you gave us was automatic." His voice was low. "The house, the car, the bills, the babysitting. I didn't see how much you were doing because you never complained. That was partly my fault." He looked surprised. "You're taking responsibility for this?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because I taught you that my boundaries could be ignored." He sat silently. I continued. "Every time I gave in because I was afraid of upsetting you, I made the next demand easier." Nathaniel slowly nodded. "I don't want to be that person anymore." I turned toward him. "You don't have to be." His eyes became glassy. For a moment, I thought he might cry. Instead, he reached across the table and took my hand. "I really am sorry. This time," I squeezed his fingers. "I know." Our relationship didn't magically return to what it had once been. That wasn't the goal. Some things cannot be repaired by pretending they never broke. But they can be rebuilt differently. Nathaniel began visiting about once a month. Sometimes he brought my grandson. Sometimes he came alone. I welcomed him warmly, but I never gave him a key, and I never offered to rescue him financially. If he needed advice, I gave advice. If he needed emotional support, I listened. But his bills remained his bills. His home remained his responsibility. His future became his to build. As for Kendra, she never visited. According to Nathaniel, she still believed I had been cruel. She told people I was selfish. At first, hearing that bothered me. Then one afternoon, I sat on my balcony watching the sunset and realized I no longer cared. People who benefit from your lack of boundaries often call you selfish when those boundaries finally appear. I had spent too many years trying to prove that I was a good mother, a generous woman, and a dependable grandmother. I no longer needed anyone's permission to value my own life. The note Nathaniel left on my pillow had once felt cold. It had sounded like rejection, but in the end, it gave me the lesson I needed most. Don't plan your future around someone who expects you to sacrifice your present for theirs. My son had told me to stop building my life around him and his household, so I finally did. I built a life around myself, and it was more beautiful than anything I had planned before. Every evening, I sit on my balcony and watch the sun disappear behind the lake. Sometimes Nathaniel calls. Sometimes my grandson visits. Sometimes I spend the entire day alone. And now, none of those things frighten me because I finally understand the difference between being alone and being free. And freedom, I discovered, has a wonderful view. If this story spoke to you, you can find more like it on Karma Uncovered.